There's a drawing in my dresser drawer. Karen made it when she was 7 years old. Crayon on printer paper. A woman in a red dress. That was me. A man with a big smile. That was Frank. 2 stick kids holding our hands. She drew the family she thought we were. Frank died 14 months ago. He had a massive stroke on a Wednesday morning. His wife, his second wife, Linda, called me because Karen gave her my number. She didn't know what else to do. I didn't know what to say. Frank and I had been divorced for 25 years. 25 years. I thought I was done with that chapter. I thought grief, if it ever came, would be clean. A newspaper notice I'd read and move on from. I was wrong. Nobody tells you what it's like to grieve someone you stopped loving decades ago. Nobody writes that part down. Nobody prepares you for the particular confusion of it. I'm Pat Walsh, I'm 80 years old, and I want to talk about what comes after. Not just after a death, after a life that didn't go the way you planned. And what you do when you find out there's still something unfinished. When Linda called me, I sat down at my kitchen table. It was 8 in the morning. I hadn't had my coffee yet. She said, "Frank passed at 6:15. She said it the way you say it when you've been saying it for 3 hours already. Practiced, steady, exhausted. I said, "I'm sorry," and I meant it. But I didn't know what else I was feeling, not yet. I called Michael first, my son. He was already on his way to Karen's. Then I called Karen. She picked up on the first ring. I could hear it in her breathing before she said a word. She said, "Mom," just that. And I said, "I know, sweetheart, I know." Now, Karen and I, it's complicated. I've said that 1,000 times, and it's always been my way of not explaining. The truth is simpler and harder than that. Karen blamed me for the divorce. She was 25 when it happened, old enough to have an opinion, old enough to take sides. She took Frank's. I understood it. I didn't like it, but I understood it. Frank was charming. Frank was fun. Frank was the parent who showed up to the Little League games in a great mood because he hadn't been carrying the weight of the household since 1973. I was the one who managed everything: the insurance, the school forms, the pediatric dentist appointments, the meals, the budget, the calls to the plumber at 7 in the morning. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought providing, really providing, sustainably, without drama, was love. Nobody told me that children don't remember the insurance paperwork. They remember who was at the dinner table. Frank left the hospital in 1987 with a back injury that ruled him out of anything physically demanding. I was already running the administration department, so I kept running it. 30 years in hospital administration. I was good at it. I was genuinely good at it. Nobody told me that being good at your job could become a kind of hiding. At the office, I knew what to do. Every problem had a protocol. Every crisis had a chain of command. Every budget met a deadline. At home, I didn't know what to do with a husband who was hurting, A husband who felt like failure because his wife was the one working. A husband who stopped talking to me sometime around 1991, and neither of us noticed for 3 years. When Frank and I finally talked, really talked, about the divorce, it was 1998. The papers were already signed. The house was sold. Michael was in his second year of college. Karen had just gotten engaged. We sat in the parking lot of a Friendly's restaurant on a Saturday afternoon. I don't know why we went to a Friendly's. That's just where we ended up. He said, and I remember this almost word for word, "Pat, I don't think either of us did this on purpose." And I said, "No, but it happened anyway." He nodded. That was probably the most honest conversation we'd had in 15 years. After the divorce, we were polite. We were functional. We showed up at the same events for the kids, and we were perfectly civil. That's what I was proud of. I thought I was being mature. What I didn't know, what I genuinely did not understand, was that being polite and being finished are two different things. You can be civil with someone for 25 years and still have a conversation you never had. Still have a thing you meant to say. Still have a door you never quite closed. I didn't know that until the door closed itself. The funeral was in Providence. Linda organized it. It was tasteful. Frank would have hated it. He liked things louder, more festive, but I didn't say that. Karen was there. We hugged. A real hug, not a courtesy hug. That was something. Michael stayed close to me the whole service. He's always been like that, my steadier one. I sat in the third row, behind Linda and her family, behind Karen and her husband. There was a photo of Frank on a board near the entrance. Frank at maybe 60, grinning, that same grin. I thought I was going to feel nothing. I had prepared myself to feel nothing. Instead, I felt, this is hard to explain, I felt the weight of everything that didn't happen. Not grief for the man he became after me, not grief for the marriage, grief for what we might have been if we'd been paying better attention. Does that make sense? I'm not saying we would have been happy. I genuinely don't know that. I'm saying I never found out, and now I can't. The week after the funeral was strange. I went back to my apartment in Providence. I sat at my kitchen table every morning with my coffee, and I kept having thoughts I didn't expect. I kept thinking about the early years, before the distance, before the silence. Frank and I met at a hospital fundraiser in 1968. He was there with his firm. I was there in my capacity as associate administrator. He walked up to me and said, "You look like the only person in this room who isn't enjoying the rubber chicken." He was right, I wasn't. We talked for 2 hours. I missed the rubber chicken entirely. That was Frank. I hadn't thought about that night in years, and then it came back, clear as anything, like it was last Tuesday. Here's what nobody tells you. They tell you grief is for people you loved, or for people who died loving you, or for loss that comes with papers and condolence cards and casseroles from neighbors. They don't tell you about this kind, the kind where someone dies and you realize you spent 25 years being very busy and very polished and very fine, and you never sat down and sorted through what was left. I thought I was done with Frank the day I signed the papers. I thought I was done with that whole story. What I was actually doing was postponing it. About 3 weeks after the funeral, Karen came to see me. She drove from Boston. She called ahead, which is unusual for her. She showed up on a Saturday with coffee from the place I like. I knew something had shifted. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd gotten Linda's call, and Karen looked at me and said, "Mom, I think I've been angry at the wrong things for a long time." I didn't say anything. I had learned very slowly in my 80s, not before, that sometimes the right response is no response. I waited. She said, "Dad and I talked a lot in the last year, about you, about us, about what really happened." She said Frank had told her something she hadn't known, that in the years before the divorce, he'd been depressed in a way he didn't have words for then, that a lot of the distance Karen saw as my coldness, my working, my managing, was me trying to keep the whole thing from falling apart. That he'd never said that clearly to her because he was ashamed of needing it said. He told her this in the last year of his life. He told her, and then he died, and she came to tell me. I thought I was done grieving at that point. I had already been through the funeral, already been through the sleepless week, already processed, I told myself. But when Karen said that, I understood something I hadn't understood before. I thought losing Frank meant losing the man he became after me, his second marriage, his grandkids I never met, his retirement years. That loss, I had already accepted that we were separate lives. What I hadn't accepted was that we were also an unfinished story. And now I would never have the last chapter. I thought I was doing the right thing. I believed that if I kept the household running, if I kept the finances solid, if I kept the appointments and the schedules and the health insurance, that was love. That was my version of love. Concrete, functional, reliable. I wasn't wrong that it was love. I was wrong that it was enough. Frank needed something else, and I didn't know how to give it to him, and I never asked what it was, and neither did he. That's not a tragedy of cruelty. That's a tragedy of two people being very busy and very capable and very bad at asking for what they needed. Here's what I've learned. Not from therapy, not from a book, from sitting at my kitchen table at 5 in the morning for 14 months. Endings don't end things. I thought divorce was a closing, a door that clicked shut. I thought if I was civil and functional and moved forward, the story was done. It wasn't done, it was just quiet. I had a story with Frank that I carried for 25 years and never looked at. And then the man died, and I had to look at it. I also learned this: grief doesn't follow the category you put it in. I was prepared to feel nothing or something distant and manageable because I had told myself there was nothing left between us. But grief doesn't care about your categories. Grief finds what's unfinished, and it finishes it, whether you're ready or not. The thing I keep coming back to, the thing I can't put down, is that Frank told Karen things in the last year that he never told me in 30 years of marriage. I don't say that with bitterness. I say it because I understand why. When you're dying, you say the things you've been carrying. You finally put them down. I wonder, and I have wondered this since Karen sat at my table, what I'm still carrying that I haven't put down. What have you been carrying that you haven't put down yet? Karen and I have talked more in the past 14 months than in the past decade. Real conversations, not logistics. We talked about her childhood, about specific moments she remembered that I didn't know she'd been carrying, about specific moments I remembered that I'd never told her. It's not fixed. I don't want to oversell it, but there's something there now that wasn't before. Frank's death gave us that. I don't know what to do with that fact, but it's true. The drawing is still in the drawer. I took it out the other day and looked at it again. The woman in the red dress, the man with the big smile, the two stick kids. Karen drew what she hoped we were. Maybe what we were, briefly, before things got complicated. I don't look at that drawing and feel regret the way I used to. I look at it and I think, that little girl saw something real. It just didn't last. Most things don't. That's not the tragedy. The tragedy is when you convince yourself it's already over and stop tending to it while it's still alive. I thought I was finished processing my marriage the day I signed those papers at 45. I was wrong. I'm 80 years old and I'm still figuring out what that marriage meant, what Frank meant, what I missed, what I gave, what I couldn't give. And I think that's okay. Not good, not the way I would have drawn it, but okay. Nobody tells you that grief comes in forms you didn't expect. Nobody tells you that you can mourn someone you hadn't spoken to in years. Nobody tells you that a story you thought was closed will walk back in through the front door when someone you used to love stops breathing. I'm telling you now. If there's a conversation you've been putting off, a person you've been politely distant from, something you've been carrying quietly and calling it done, don't wait for the call that makes you sort through it anyway. You still have time. I say that to you and I say it to myself. If this reached something in you, leave me a comment. I read every one. And if you know someone going through something like this, a loss that doesn't fit the usual shape, send them this. Sometimes just knowing someone else has been through the confusion of it is enough.